Hello and welcome to Cash Chats, the podcast from Be Clever With Your Cash that helps you make the most of your money. I'm Amelia Murray, and on episode 400 of Cash Chats, we've got something a bit special for you. You may have already seen the story on becleverwithyourcash.com about Andrew Merritt, who was the victim of a shoulder surfing criminal who stole his smartphone and £20,000 of his savings. Well, we've got him with us today to tell his story, along with cybersecurity expert David McClelland, to help us understand more. This is episode 400 of Cash Chats. Phone theft and the damage criminals can do once they've got hold of your phone has been hitting the headlines recently. Nearly 52,000 phones were stolen in London last year, but the problem is widespread all over the UK. Today, we've got two special guests to chat more about this crime, its impact on victims, and how to protect yourself. Firstly, Andrew Merritt, a member of the Be Clever With Your Cash community, who's here to talk about his own experience. Andrew had his phone stolen a few months ago in central London, and the crook managed to get into his banking apps, steal £20,000 of his savings, and take out a £15,000 loan in his name at 5 a.m. We've also got David McClelland, researcher, journalist, and Rip Off Britain's resident tech expert, who's going to help us understand how criminals are able to do this and what measures we can take to stop it happening to us. Hi guys, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Now, we've published this story already on the Be Clever With Your Cash website, and it's really resonated with readers. David, can you tell us more about how this crime plays out?
Okay, well, so our phones, sometimes they cost an awful lot of money to buy, in excess of £1,000 for a top-end iPhone or Android phone these days. But as far as criminals are concerned, the device has a limited value. The reason that criminals target our phone is not for resale value of the phone, it's for the access that it provides to potential victims, to us, the amount of information that we have stored on our phones, and using it as a gateway to our financial information. That is the real pot of gold for criminals who are becoming increasingly organized, increasingly prolific in their in the way that they steal phones from us, and then how quickly they're able, once they get hold of a device, how quickly they're able to extract value from the device. It might be that they never actually sell on the device, but the information that they're able to garner from it is really where the money is for them.
Yeah, this happened to a friend recently. He didn't have any money stolen, but he was walking along the street and someone whipped his phone out of his hand. They were riding past on a moped. Is that how it normally pans out? Like, how are people targeted?
Yeah, well, I think this kind of theft has changed over the years because once upon a time, it was the phone, it was the physical bit of tech that had the value for criminals. And back in the days before we had passcodes and biometric unlocking things on our phones, it was very easy for criminals to resell those, just wipe them, pull the SIM card out, and to resell them. But phone manufacturers and mobile networks, and indeed us as consumers, have got a little bit wiser to that. So the way that criminals operate has also changed, has also evolved as well. And very often nowadays, we are seeing criminals targeting certain high footfall areas. And there's some recent data, and you alluded to some of it earlier on, about areas of London, for example, with particularly high footfall, big shopping areas, for example, where criminals seem to be concentrating their efforts. And very often they will target people. It might be a moped. It might be one of the electric bicycles that are increasingly around town and available to hire. It might just be people on foot. The same kind of pickpocket theft that we've been used to for 200-300 years or more in central London. So really, as our protections evolve against this kind of threat, as always, the criminals modify, evolve their behaviour as well.
Brilliant. And I want to talk more about, yeah, how they actually get the access later on. But Andrew, as someone who's been targeted by these criminals, like, tell us your story. What happened?
So I was walking home. I went to a gig in central London, and I got the tube to Leicester Square. Walked over to Piccadilly Circus to get the bus, and just like that, my phone was gone. It's quite blurry now. I think maybe partly I've tried to block it out a bit, but from what I can remember, it was just gone instantly. And my initial, reaction wasn't. I wasn't that worried. The phone didn't have much value, but like David said, I later learned that it wasn't really the phone that they wanted itself. It was like the data and information on it. So then obviously I managed to finally get home. I rely on Apple Pay, so I didn't have any cards or anything. The police managed to get me on a bus to get home, but by that time it was too late. They'd gained access to my Apple ID and everything like that. And the situation I was in was I didn't have any means of contacting banks or anything at the time, so it was quite a long night trying to sort of gain access to all my various different apps and banking apps, and even get back into my Apple ID, because the person who stole it obviously changed the passwords and everything for that.
And how did you realize the money or the thief was stealing from you? What were you seeing during that time?
Yeah, so initially I got home, no idea. I didn't even think about the banks. And I thought, right, I can't contact anyone. I try to go on Facebook on my iPad, and I don't have it on there. I don't have any messaging services. But I did manage to get into my emails. And then it was the first thing I saw was the Halifax loan. And I thought, oh no, like straight away, I'm seeing this loan and I can't even phone Halifax. Um, and then I start seeing like various cards being added to Apple Pay, even banking apps that didn't have any cash in it. So I wasn't too worried about them. But obviously, I later learned that the fraudster moved money between my accounts. Um, but that was the initial sort of when I thought this is a bit worse than just the phone being stolen.
Hmm. And so was that the morning that you got back, or that time that you got back and you were kind of, you first saw the emails, and then did it progress the next day?
Yeah, yeah. So when I first got home, they were sort of filtering through quite quickly, and then obviously then I was sort of like, okay, it's getting quite bad now, seeing all the activity that's going on. All through the next day, emails from my like Experian and ClearScore saying that my credit checks have been verified and successful, and for loads of companies that I've never even heard of. Like my credit score looked like a essay at uni at one point. It was just, and I was thinking, when's this guy going to stop? Do you know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
I thought, okay, he's got some cash. He's going to try and ditch the phone. But it was sort of all the next day, and even for days afterwards, he continued trying to gain access one way or another.
Mhm. And you say he spent £20,000. That was in quite a short period of time, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was within sort of a couple of hours. My main problem was where the cash was. I phoned that bank, and I was on the phone to them for about 2 hours while he was spending the cash. I wish sort of the bank had said, the money's technically not been spent. It's gone to this account in your name. Obviously, you can Google the sort code and find out which bank it was. Then I'd have contacted them. But it was all quite, there's a few things that I did wrong, but you're sort of never really prepared for that. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm. God, it must be so horrendous, like, watching someone spend your money and you can't really do anything about it, or you feel that kind of helpless feeling. Um, David, people are very interested in how this actually happens. How do you think once someone has stolen your phone, how do they get into it? And then how do they access your apps?
Well, there's no one size fits all for this. Interesting hearing what Andrew said in terms of the sometimes the lack of collaboration between the financial institutions and between the various bodies who we have accounts with. If only they were able to talk to one another, share information with one another, particularly in the cases of fraud like this, in the way that criminals collaborate. I've been to a number of events over the years where financial bodies have got together with telecoms providers and said, look, there are legal restrictions. There are reasons why it's very difficult for us to collaborate in the event of fraud, but those barriers aren't there for criminals. Criminals collaborate so very, very easily, share information, have a playbook almost, brilliant. You've got a phone. These are the five first things that you should check. So to answer your question in terms of what criminals do, obviously you have to be a little bit careful because we don't want to create a run book that people listening and watching would be able to follow to extract information themselves. But there are a number of ways, and that depends upon the kind of phone that you have, the kind of protections that you have on your phone. So one of the simplest things is there a passcode unlock on your phone? And if there is a passcode unlock, generally speaking, the thumbprints, the face ID, and the passcodes, they are fairly robust. Now, if you are a criminal who's got resources, who is targeting individuals, then there are ways around this, and we've seen some very high-profile cases against politicians, against journalists, and so on over the years, where if you have access to appropriate zero-day vulnerabilities, then you can get into somebody's phone and you can install malware on there and all kinds of stuff. Personally, I don't think that for the scale of the crime that we're talking about here, like you said, 52,000 phones reported lost or stolen, rather, in London last year alone, and I'm sure that's just the tip of the iceberg. I think there are other ways in which criminals are extracting value from those devices. So often it's what's with the phone. Sometimes phones have cards in the back. Sometimes the phones aren't locked. Sometimes text messages and other messages coming through to the phone, you don't necessarily need to unlock the phone in order to see the messages coming through to the phone. And in the case of password resets, in the case of two-factor authentication codes, those codes that whenever you might choose to log on to a service for the first time from a new device, we need you to prove you are who you say you are. We'll send you this six-digit code to your phone. If you don't have your phone set up in the right way to prevent unauthorized people from seeing those messages, then that can be a security vulnerability as well. Maybe having access to search certain things from the front page of your phone, again, without necessarily unlocking your phone, is one way that criminals can get in. And also, one thing I will mention as well, because this is something that so often gets skipped, but a piece of research that I'm doing at the moment is really highlighting the value that criminals can extract from this, is the SIM card, that little bit of plastic, that little chip essentially that we plug into the majority of our phones. This is changing, but not quite there yet. If a criminal can't get access to your physical device, you do have the passcode lock on there. Often what they can do is just get a little pin or something, take out that SIM, and then put it into a phone that they do own, that they are able to unlock. Now, they won't have access to your data necessarily, but what they will have access to are any messages, any calls that they make will be coming from your number. And in some cases, again, without wanting to go into too much information, even without any information about you, just by having your SIM card, within a couple of minutes, they can extract hundreds of pounds from you and from your mobile account without you and sometimes the mobile provider really even knowing anything about it.
God, it's frightening, isn't it?
It is. It is. It's a real eye opener. And if I'm being perfectly honest, I don't know that mobile networks are doing all that they should be doing. I believe that they know about the risks that are out there, but I don't believe they're doing all that they could be doing to protect consumers when their phones are lost or stolen, snatched out of their hands.
Oh my God. Yeah, it all sounds awful. And this isn't supposed to make people feel paranoid. It's more just to kind of make people aware and hopefully be vigilant, especially when you're in public areas. Um, and I was watching an interview recently on This Morning where they were, talking to this criminal gang leader, and he was responsible for a team of people on motorbikes who were responsible for stealing these phones. Um, and he was saying they target people who are on the phone. So the phone is unlocked when you're speaking to someone, and that's when they snatch it. So they,
Yep.
in some cases they might be looking over people's shoulders to see when people are entering the passcode. But in other cases, they're snatching the phone when it's already open. So just be really mindful if you're speaking on the phone in a public place. But Andrew, back to you. Has it all been put right now?
Yeah. So everything is taken a long time. Put right is in. It took me a few days to even get access to my phone. Like David said, are they doing all they can do with actual my phone number? It took me about 3 days to even get the old one cancelled and get my new one set up. There was a few mistakes that they made, which mistakes happen, so I didn't get access back as soon as I could. But I got that back. My Apple ID took over a week to get access to that, which was quite important because everything's stored on the cloud. Passwords for every app, every website, photos, notes, voice messages, everything was there. So I lost access to everything. That took 4 to 5 days to get back up. And financially, all the credit cards was the next day. I spoke to and credit cards wasn't like the priority. It was more sort of actual cash. So the next day they gave the money back straight away for the credit cards, and other banking institutions. It was quite harder to get it back because it is a lot of the money went to accounts in my name, and some of the accounts I use they're kind of like PayPal. I don't know if I can name any banks here, but someone. Sure. So for example, Nationwide, brilliant, right? The fraudster tried to take cash from me there, and he needed a card reader. And although they sound old-fashioned, I'm sort of tempted to get back on that, just because he tried everything with Nationwide, couldn't transfer the cash out, couldn't spend it, so that was the safest. But then there's another account that I use called Wise, and I'd never spent anything on that card, and he managed to move in over 10 grand and spend it all in the same day. And half of that was spent after I actually locked the card, like froze the card. So that was quite hard to get back because I don't class it as a bank. I class it as similar to like PayPal, so that was quite tricky.
Yeah, and the issue here as well, because there were, if you look on the website, Be Clever with Your Cash, and you read the article, I've included lots of the different transactions. So the fraudster kind of managed to get into your accounts and then move money from your savings to your current, and then to Wise. And then that's when the money exited the banking system where he was kind of spending all this money. And I remember you telling me, all the transactions, like £5,000 in Kodak and all these kind of barbers and dinners. And I'm trying to remember the sports shops as well. So like going on this proper spending spree while you're helpless to stop it. You mentioned earlier there was a couple of things you think you did wrong. Can you tell me more about that, and also what things that you've done since?
Yeah. So actual pre-crime, I guess I sort of underestimated, the ease of a passcode, or from what I can understand is the fraudster probably saw me type in my code because it definitely wasn't unlocked when they took it. So that's my assumption anyway. A harder passcode is something that I definitely should have done. Something that you couldn't look. It wasn't easy to guess, but it did. It had a pattern to it that could be easily replicated. And then other things like that I did wrong is most of my passwords, and I think a lot of people are guilty for it, are pretty similar. You might add a full stop or exclamation mark somewhere, but they are usually similar unless you use the authentication apps, which I never really bothered with because I thought, well, I save them in iCloud. But as soon as someone had my 6-digit phone code, they could go into my password saved on my phone and access all of my passwords. It was just that 6-digit code that got that locked my phone. Other things that I didn't do right is sort of prioritizing who I called. I called the people where the cash was, but I should have been calling the people where the cash went. Things like that. So I sort of thought, okay, started in order of priority of where I kept cash, but I spent too long on the phone. I should have phoned them and said, please lock my account and my cards. I'll ring you back later to discuss if there's been any activity, because I couldn't see any activity. So obviously it was initially a shock for me. So I was thinking, okay, let's try and lock the accounts. I also had my driving license in the back of my phone, which I don't use a wallet, so it was quite handy just keeping it in. It's like a phone case. It's like a wallet as well. I didn't keep any cards in it because I didn't ever use cards anymore. But having that in there, I feel as though that helped them, sort of clone my identity to be applying for loans and things like that. You know.
Yeah, I don't think you're alone there either with the phone case that is also the wallet and people keep their cards in. So yeah, definitely one to be careful of. And you have put some measures in place now. Do you want to tell us a few things that you've done differently now?
Yeah. So what David was saying earlier about it being swiped from your hand, um, I think that's always going to be an issue if you have it out. So just for my own peace of mind, I don't know if you can see it, but there's like a case you can get. This has got like a lock on it, and you can attach that to a lanyard. It's not the coolest looking thing, but it's not very cool being up for 4 days, sort of trying to get your cash back. So
Mhm.
when I'm out in London, I'll do that for ease and other things like I don't have banking apps on my phone anymore, and obviously that's not possible for some people. Say, for example, Chase is phone only, and I think Starling might be. I'm not too sure of which ones are and which ones aren't. But if you can, try and sort of keep them off your anything that you're taking out of your home. Um, that's another thing. And also, I've got an app called Cape, and I know there's similar ones on Android that sort of, as soon as I leave a trusted Wi-Fi, it locks all of my apps, and any that I want to go into, I'll just use my fingerprint and just it will let me in for a certain period of time, and then it will lock it again. I assume there's some sort of similar one to for Android. From what I've heard, Android is ahead of the game in terms of security. I've never had a problem with Apple before that, and Cape seems to be proving worth it. So, but I do know in the next iOS they're going to have that as standard anyway, that you can lock individual apps.
And so, David, this crime would be awful for anyone to go through. And on this interview that I mentioned earlier, the criminal gang leader was saying the most he's ever got from a phone was about 40 to 50,000 pounds, and he managed to get that within like half an hour.
Mm.
So, is there anything else that people can do to protect themselves?
Gosh, yeah. So I think there's two things here. I mean, first of all, prevention is better than cure. So some of the measures that Andrew mentioned there, I think, are very wise indeed. Stolen device protection is one of the features that Apple has introduced for iPhone owners, and that provides an additional layer of protection should your device get swiped. That put makes it a bit more difficult for criminals to act quickly. As we identified, these criminals know the clock is ticking the moment that they swipe a phone, before it gets reported, before the phone gets blocked, and before the victim makes those phone calls to the various banks. So they're acting very, very quickly. And one of the things they may do, as happened with Andrew, was for your iCloud password, for example, to be reset. So there are a suite of measures that are in there, and that's available right now in iOS 17 as we record right now. It's not switched on by default, but I do urge people to hunt it down. Just go into settings and look for stolen device protection and make sure that is enabled. And one of the things that it does do is just prompt for passwords a little bit more frequently, particularly when you're accessing your iCloud keychain passwords, if that's what you're using. For biometrics, it'll delay changes to certain things for up to an hour, I think, afterwards as well. And whenever I talk about Apple on shows, I always get the Android people banging on my door saying, "You always talk about Apple, why not Android?" There are similar things now. Just looking on Google's latest announcements, they also have a number of new measures that they're rolling out this year to provide similar protections as well, including, you mentioned Cape there, an iOS app, including the ability to hide or provide additional protections for certain apps on your phone, like the banking apps. The other thing, again, prevention is please enable that SIM lock. This will prevent a criminal from taking the SIM out of your phone and putting it into a new phone. So it's like a 4-digit pin that you will need to set, but that will make your life so much safer against this kind of theft. That's the prevention. But what happens if the worst does happen? And you speak about, Andrew, being in the eye of the storm, and it is incredibly upsetting, incredibly unsettling as well when things are happening and you don't know what they are. You don't know what's going to be happening next. It's great in hindsight saying they did this, then they did that, and then they did the other thing. But while it's happening, you don't know. So what can you do? Well, first of all, I recommend just making a little audit of the accounts that you have. Do not store this on your phone, whatever you do, but just have a little mental checklist, or written on a bit of paper. Right, these are the top five banking apps or places where I've got money. If my phone or if my digital IDs were to be compromised, then what are the places that I need to get in touch with first of all? Because you might forget that you had your pension app on your phone, and criminals might be able to do something with that. I don't know, but try and make a good long list of those. And then the other thing, you mentioned it there, if criminals get access to your phone, they get access to your email. And I noticed in some of the comments to the article that you wrote, Amelia, there were some people a bit confused about password resets and about how, well with banks, that can take a few days to happen, depending upon the bank you're with. Actually, some of the online accounts, certainly not all of them, your email is crucial to that. So it might be your PayPal or something like that, where it's a little bit more instant. So if a criminal gets access to your email, then, that's really, really bad news. So never, never, never use the same password twice. Use a password manager. Always enable two-factor authentication. Although if a criminal has access to your mobile, then maybe not quite so easy. So use an authenticator app where possible. Passkeys are something that I'm sure we'll be able to talk about in the future, because they are also coming in to replace our passwords and make our lives a little bit more secure. So yeah, prevention. Make sure your phone is as locked down as it can be, and then just make that list of the places where criminals might be able to extract value from you in case the worst were to happen. Essentially, you've got your checklist of places to phone and accounts to get locked down before too much gets taken away from them.
Brilliant tips. Thank you so much for sharing those, David. If people want to learn more, where can they find you?
Me? Well, I'm at David McClelland, all the C's, all the L's, and a couple of vowels chucked in for good measure, on most of the socials, and .co.uk online as well. Hey, even find me on LinkedIn. I lurk around there sometimes.
Great. And thank you, Andrew, so much for sharing your story. And I'm really glad it's finally been resolved. And yeah, you can move forward.
Thank you. No, thank you for doing the article. I only wanted to do it just to get the awareness out. That's literally the thought of it happening to a friend or family. I couldn't bear them, going through what I did. So no, I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm sure that this podcast and the article, and also the other articles that we're going to publish on the website to help people protect themselves against this kind of crime, will be really useful. So yeah, if you are interested in learning more about this, how to protect your phone from thieves and what to do if your phone does get stolen, we have got some articles on becleverwithyourcash.com. So thank you both again for joining us, and hopefully see you soon. And that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining us on episode 400 of Cash Chats. We're back with our look at the top money stories on Thursday on YouTube and Friday on all podcast apps. See you then.